What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Hey guys, and welcome to the Week 6 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown. I'm your host, Jake Tribbey. I couldn't be happier to be back for Week 6. I'm joined by my co-host, Millionaire Maker winner, and one of the greatest spring football DFS players ever, Neil Orfield. Neil, how you doing this week?
I'm doing well. Ready to come back after what was not a great week for me last week. Definitely lost some money. I slammed Mark Thompson. That did not go well for me at all. So hopefully we can switch things up this week. Take one down.
Yeah. The Mark Thompson thing is something we will discuss when we get to the Houston game. That was unbelievably frustrating. I had a pretty weird week. I didn't do great in the main $20 GPP, but I won pretty much everything at low stakes. I had 3 in the top 5 in the mini max. Came very close to winning one of the showdown slates for $1,000. So, overall, okay. On my end, I did think it was pretty interesting that in Discord this week, we had a bit of a disagreement on late swap. I thought that this wasn't exactly a clear-cut week in terms of late swap. There weren't a ton of, ideal, 2 to 5% owned options that presented a great ceiling. But we were kind of on opposite sides of the Blake Jackson argument. I thought he was a bit too cute of a late swap option to me, despite the fact that he shows up pretty highly in your routes run per yard buy low model. I am generally pretty skeptical of slot receivers who show up highly there, just because I don't perceive much of a ceiling, especially within the St. Louis Battlehawks offense, where, we know Ja'Cour Pearson is going to soak up most of the slot volume this offense has. And if you exclude the one 45-yard touchdown that, basically slipped through Blake Jackson's hands, I think it was overthrown by maybe half a yard. All of his usage has been on screens or very short throws. And that's just not ideal when you're looking for a 1 or 2% owned guy who offers a bit of a ceiling. I did play some Blake Jackson, but almost exclusively only in AJ McCarron triple stacks, because that was really, one of the few ways you could fit those stacks. So yeah, Neil, I'm kind of curious on your thoughts there with Blake Jackson as a late swap option.
Yeah. So this debate happened, of course, after the game. So I want to be clear about this. Already knew the result. And somebody had said in Discord, talked about late swap, and you gave Blake Jackson as an example of somebody who you thought was too cute for a late swap. And I was like, I actually played a lot of Blake Jackson in my main lineups just based on the projected ownership. So my thinking on Blake Jackson is, yeah, sure. I mean, I guess maybe his usage has not been ideal so far, but they switch things up so often that it's definitely a factor. But when you can get somebody who the week prior had run 34 routes, and that was with Darius Shepherd healthy. So Darius Shepherd out for that game, I thought they might change up his role a little bit. He's also a guy who has been an XFL star in the past, or he at least had boom games in the XFL. So just factoring in 0 ownership, 34 routes run last week, which is probably, top 10% in the league. In an explosive offense, I thought that he was actually a great play to me. Of course, then this week, he only ran 12 routes total. So after running 34, and he last week was an outlier. So it was definitely a little bit of a risky play. But when you can get a guy at low ownership, at like 0 ownership in an explosive offense who is running a lot of routes, like those are the guys that I'm going to take shots on. And of course, when you see him not running routes this week, it's like, okay, well, maybe I don't know what happened last week where he was running a lot of routes, but clearly they no longer are using him in that role. So I'm not playing any Blake Jackson this week. Now that we've seen generally he has not been a guy who's running a ton of routes in recent weeks, with that one exception. So yeah, now I'm back off the Blake Jackson train this week. I just thought that was one example to me of he hasn't done anything, so nobody's going to use him. But there are some metrics that you can see there that are just one little tweak to the offense. Maybe they change it up a little bit and suddenly he explodes at 0 ownership, and those guys just really separate you. But to your side of the argument, these contests are a lot smaller than a lot of these aren't 20,000 person GPPs. So maybe there is a point that it was too cute. I think it would be too cute to play him this week. I just thought last week there was a real potential role there for him.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. From a game theory perspective, I think you're largely correct. But the ball knower in me just had a really hard time clicking a guy like Blake Jackson, where I really couldn't see much of a ceiling outcome there. All right, Neil. Any other notes on last week or late swap or anything like that before we start talking about these games?
I'm sure there's plenty that we will as we get to other games. I'm trying to remember. Oh, the Troy Williams I thought was a fantastic late swap last week after he became the starter at. I don't remember what I feel like his ownership didn't end up as low as I kind of expected it to be, but I thought that was a really interesting late swap opportunity when he was named as the starting quarterback. I also think so. I noticed kind of late in my process that Darius Shepard was out. I think that kind of provided that to me was like a wheels up for Hakeem Butler, Ja'Cour Pearson. And of course, Hakeem Butler went off. Ja'Cour Pearson did not go off. But that's, it is important, I think, to keep an eye on injury news as it comes out, because I almost missed that Darius Shepard was out last week. And it was pretty important news.
Yeah, absolutely. Troy Williams ended up coming in at 7.5%, which, certainly exceeded my expectations by a bit. All right. So for those of you who are unaware, Fantasy Points has a UFL DFS product this season. You get player projections, main slate ownership, and exclusive UFL DFS Discord channel where you can ask me, Neil, Chris Weck, Johnny Proctor questions about the slate. And you get access to my UFL articles, which are going to be behind the paywall every other week. This week's is behind the paywall. We're at the halfway point in the UFL season, and I'm very proud to say that our player projections have been the most accurate in the industry. Granted, it has been very close because every site does a great job. But what's impressed me even more is that our ownership projections have been by far the most accurate in the industry. Just last week, we posted a 0.97 correlation between our projected ownership and actual ownership. I honestly didn't even think that was possible. That blew my mind. We've also slashed the sticker price of our UFL product down to $70 for the rest of the season. Promo code UFL 2024 gets you an additional 15% off on top of it. So that brings the weekly cost down to just $8.50 per week for the rest of the season. This is our best deal since week one. So if you were on the fence about subscribing, this is the week to do it. And you can get even more value from our UFL product if you have access to ESPN Bet, because they are listing UFL player props. This blew my mind, but the menu was surprisingly deep. They actually listed a prop for about 15 players last night. There were some massive discrepancies between these props and our projections, which makes for a great betting opportunity. And the best part is that you don't need to sit around in Discord for me to tell you what to bet, because we don't just display projected fantasy points in our UFL projections. Our projections list out all the individual stats that go into our final projected fantasy point number. So you can see exactly how many receiving yards we have Justin Hall projected for, making the process of betting these props incredibly convenient for our subscribers. I already got quite a bit of action down on some of these ESPN bet props through a friend because I live in Georgia. So definitely something you'll want to take advantage of on Thursdays, assuming they, release those with a consistent schedule. But I imagine that will be, well beyond, our standard betting lines for games. The opportunities there will just be fantastic in terms of betting. So now that we've got all that out of the way, we can start talking about these games. First game up, Birmingham Stallions at the Memphis Showboats. Birmingham is favored by 13.5. DraftKings actually just bumped this. I believe it opened at 11.5. Birmingham just keeps getting bet up. Total here is 43. I definitely see some value on the over. To me, this is, with Case Cookus back at quarterback for Memphis, with Adrian Martinez now the starter for Birmingham. I think this total should be closer to 47-ish. I actually found a 42.5 offshore that was plus 109 on the over, which was very nice. I think the line's about right, though. Neil, do you have a take on any bets for this game?
I don't know that I love the over. I think that the Stallions defense is just a little bit too good for me to feel comfortable with an over. I guess the Showboats it's one of those where it's like, it's a great spot for the Stallions offense, horrible spot for the Showboats offense. And I guess I don't have a strong lean one way or the other in terms of the over under. I kind of like I'll take the points with them. I'm seeing on DraftKings right now, Memphis plus 13.5. I'll take the points there on that's a huge line. You don't see that very often in a UFL in the UFL. So that's, I'll just take the points there. It's too big of a gap, in my opinion.
Yeah, our internal numbers see some slight value on Memphis here, but I have a very, very hard time, as always, betting against Birmingham. Not sure if I mentioned this, but this game does kick off at noon Eastern, so that'll be when the 4-game slate locks this week. In terms of injuries on the Birmingham side, CJ Maribel is back from his personal absence. He has practiced all week, but he's listed as the RB2 behind Ricky Person. And then Adrian Martinez, as I mentioned before, is listed as the starter. He will make his second consecutive start. Otherwise, they are completely clean on the Birmingham side. For Memphis, Vinny Papali is dealing with a shoulder. Dawood Davis is dealing with a back injury. They've been limited in practice this week, but they've been dealing with these injuries for multiple weeks. Both players are listed as starters and will be active. DeAndre Overton is out with a shoulder injury, so expect a few more routes on the outside for backup wide receiver D. Anderson. That matters for Showdown, but only barely. All right, starting with the Birmingham side here. I mean, you look at our quarterback projections, Adrian Martinez is so far ahead of the quarterback two that it's pretty wild. I don't think we've ever had this big of a gap for as long as we've been doing UFL, XFL quarterback projections between the QB1 and the QB2. In terms of Adrian Martinez's rushing stats, if he kept up what he's doing right now for the rest of the season, he would break every UFL, XFL, USFL, NFL, college football record for rushing yards per carry. Absolutely insane. He's averaging 0.85 fantasy points per dropback, which is also insane. Last year, the NFL leader was Josh Allen at 0.65. Martinez is almost double the next closest UFL quarterback in terms of fantasy points per dropback. So, even last week, we saw Martinez didn't really look great as a passer, but it didn't matter because he was ripping 20-yard carries left and right. Neil, Martinez is, I think, without a doubt, going to be the most popular quarterback play of the slate. How do you want to handle it? And, can we go anywhere here besides Deion Kane and Jay Sternberger if we're stacking him?
Yeah, I think the 27% ownership is fair. I think that's I'm probably not taking a big stand one way or the other. I'll probably be right around the field on Adrian Martinez. As you say, just the projection is enormous, and it should be enormous. He's been running out of his mind and has had some good games through the air as well. Hard to argue against, especially in the spot against the Showboats. Like, this is one of the best spots you can have as a quarterback. So yeah, it's wheels up for Adrian Martinez. I might end up over the field on Martinez. I'll have to look at if any of the other quarterbacks stand out to me as we're talking through them. But as of right now, I would not be surprised if I end up overweight to the field on Adrian Martinez. As far as stacking options, at 10,300, I am going to have at least one pass catcher. So I know some people might be tempted to run him out there naked, but I think at this price tag, he's probably going to need to do at least, throw at least one touchdown through the air or rack up yards, get some of his fantasy usage through the yards. So I won't run him out there naked. Outside of Jay Sternberger, Deion Kane, and those are absolutely my favorites here. I don't know if there is anybody else. You could, I guess, go to a Benjamin Victor at 3,700. I don't feel good about it. I don't feel great about anybody else. It's probably just those two for me. But I guess, we made the argument a few weeks back with Garbers that I suggested playing a lower owned receiver with him because he was so chalky. I guess you could make the argument that you could throw in a Gary Jennings or Benjamin Victor just to bring down your stack ownership. But I also think here, 27%, he's not projected for as much ownership as we had Garbers at last week. And these plays, I think, are thinner than we had with Justin Smith the other week. So it's probably honestly just Deion Kane and Jay Sternberger for me here.
Yeah. I have a really hard time going elsewhere here. Amari Rogers feels too thin with Marlon Williams in the lineup. Benjamin Victor just isn't posting the route share that we need. I guess my favorite would be Kevin Austin because he does seem to be getting some end zone chances, some deep shots, but even that feels very, very thin. To me, I think I'm just going to be mixing in Deion Kane and Jay Sternberger here. I'll end up playing some Martinez, naked by himself. I would also say that, I'll be generally staying away from Martinez with either Birmingham running backs. Specifically, though, I think Ricky Person is the guy who gets hurt the most. He has a slightly lesser pass game role and, is more live, I think, for inside the 5 carries, which Martinez is more likely to steal. Do you have any takes on playing these Birmingham running backs with Adrian Martinez?
Yeah, it's a little bit thinner now just because of how expensive they are.
Yeah.
Man, Ricky Person shot up there. He had 14 rush attempts, ran 11 routes, saw a target last week. I'm not going to set a rule that I can't do it, but I don't think I'm going to have a ton of Adrian Martinez with Ricky Person or CJ Marable. I think I'd prefer to have him without the running backs. But I'm also, like I said, I'm not going to set a rule against it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a spot where Birmingham could score 40 points, right? So in that scenario, you could see either the running backs being brought along with Adrian Martinez here. Speaking of these running backs, like I said, Ricky Person is listed as the starter here on the depth chart. He's popping industry-wide as a better value than CJ Marable, but Marable's a guy that I have a lot of interest in for tournaments. I really don't think he's going to get steamed beyond single-digit ownership, which certainly makes me tempted because he's first in running back weighted opportunity, which again, as I've said on previous shows, that's the single best stat that we have for UFL running backs. He also leads all running backs in rushing attempts per game. He's the most due for a big game. We can take a player's DraftKings fantasy points per game, compare it to his weighted opportunity. CJ Marable is the guy we are looking at the most for some positive regression. He's only averaging 8.9 DraftKings fantasy points per game. But again, his workload is worth 15.5 fantasy points per game. So we would expect some positive regression from Marable. And of course, as I'll always mention, leads all running backs in red zone opportunities per game. And it really isn't even that close. 4.8 red zone opportunities per game for CJ Marable. So I think you could argue for either running back. I mean, they're priced the same. In my head, I kind of view them as identical plays this week. Do you have any takes on Ricky Person, CJ Marable as a standalone play?
Yeah, I think they're both totally fine standalone plays. I guess given the ownership, I think you're probably right. You could play either of them. I don't think I'm going to take a huge stand on either of them, but I do think I'll probably be close to the field on both, just because, as you said, this is as good of a spot for an offense as you can be in. The Stallions could just put up 1 billion points here, and I mean, it's not impossible for both of these running backs to get there. I don't think I would play them together just because they're both so expensive, but I think they both should have opportunities here in a great spot. So I think the 16% we have going to Ricky Person, 9% to CJ Marable, both seem pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah, to me, I guess you could play them together, in the event that Birmingham puts up a ton of points and really none of them happen to go to Adrian Martinez. But I mean, spending, 17,000, which is what, 35% of your total salary on two running backs from the same team. That's definitely tough. But if you were going to play, two running backs from the same team, you'd want it to be the team that has by far the most valuable fantasy backfield in the UFL. All right, moving on to the Memphis side of things. We have Case Cookus back at quarterback this week for Memphis. Last week we saw a ceiling performance from Dawood Davis. What I thought was funny about that was it was actually Dawood's worst game of the season from just a film perspective. I didn't really think he looked particularly good. He had a bad drop as well as just a horrific fumble in there. And I do wonder, just from watching all these games multiple times, if Case Cookus is actually slightly worse for Dawood Davis than Troy Williams, not necessarily because of any changes in volume, but more because on these deep throws, which Dawood Davis is getting a ton of, Troy Williams was slightly overthrowing him. Case Cookus is underthrowing everything. So generally speaking, I would, just from the film I've seen, I would lean towards Troy Williams maybe being a little bit better for Dawood's ceiling. But at the same time, we're kind of at the same place we always are with this Memphis team. They run a ton of plays. We expect them to be down. I think this week we have them projected for 43 passing plays and 13 rushing plays, which is just absurd. But, that's what happens when the spread is double digits. I don't know if I'm going to get to any Cookus here. I do just think there are better options across the board, especially after how we saw them play at Birmingham just a few weeks ago. Neil, do you have any love for Case Cookus? I imagine, Dawood Davis will be a guy you're pretty interested in, but any of these other Memphis options?
No, I don't think so. Stallions giving up less than 14 points. I mean, they've given up 68 total points through 5 weeks. So less than a couple touchdowns per game. It's just it's tough for a quarterback to pay off. Now, the one thing that Cookus does have going for him is, like you said, they should be just having to throw a ton to try and keep up with the Stallions. So that is the one benefit to Cookus, where you could consider playing him at 8,200, 3% ownership. My guess is that I don't end up with any Case Cookus. But it's an interesting case. At least they have had games in the past where Cookus threw the ball. I guess it's one game where he threw the ball 40 times. Multiple games where they've thrown over 30 times in a week. So they're not afraid to air it out. But at the end of the day, I don't think I'm going to get there, just because I think there are enough quarterbacks in better spots where I'm probably not playing Cookus. Like you said, it's funny. Jonathan Adams finally gets there. First week where I'm like, all right, I'm not playing Jonathan Adams anymore. Didn't run a ton of routes the week prior, so wasn't even looking good by the Neil My Guys metric. This week, of course, he gets back to the top of the routes run. 38 routes run for Jonathan Adams. Still only saw 3 targets, but gets there on 2 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown. But Dawood Davis, 14 targets is insane for Dawood Davis. Hard not to have some interest there. Like that'd be a tough fade, even in a tough spot against this Stallions defense. Again, they're gonna have to be throwing it a ton. So I think my exposure to this passing offense is just gonna be through one-off receivers here and there. Hope that if they are airing it out, they're airing it out to one specific receiver. And along those lines, I think all of Adams, Dawood Davis, Sage Surratt, and Vinny Papali are all in play at relatively low ownership. But the 14 targets for Dawood Davis, he clearly stands out in a tier of his own. And then I think all of Adams, Sage Surratt, Vinny Papali, just kind of low owned, mix them into your lineups here and there kind of guys.
Yeah, I'm largely with you there. I mean, I think you could make a somewhat compelling case for Cookus double stacks as just like no one's going to do it, and your stack ownership is going to be basically 0, even if you do play a guy like Dawood Davis. But yeah, if you're looking at one-offs here, I think, all of the big 4 Memphis receivers are in play, but obviously Dawood is going to be the guy you want because, I mean, man, 25-30% target share just feels like arguably his median here. I think it was closer to 40% last week, which is just absurd. Darius Victor, can't forget about him. Kind of the same thing as always with Darius Victor. He's playing a ton. We had him at a, let's see, what was it? 87% snap share last week, 71% route share, 87% of backfield weighted opportunity, excuse me. It only amounted to 9.7, weighted opportunity points in terms of that statistic. So, not a great workload overall. It's really hard for a guy like Victor to have a ceiling performance when Memphis isn't scoring many touchdowns. And even when they are in the red zone, they have no faith handing him the football. In previous weeks, I would have said he has the best touchdown equity of any UFL running back. I don't think that's true anymore because the team, even in the red zone, is so pass heavy. And again, we expect him to be playing from behind. So even if Victor does see a 90% snap share, I mean, is 7 carries and 5 targets going to get you excited for a somewhat expensive running back who's going to be 15 to 20% owned? I don't know. It's a tough sell, but I'm also not sure he's a guy I want to completely X out of my player pool because with this sort of underlying usage, you could see a big ceiling performance, but this definitely doesn't feel like it this week against a Birmingham defense that's allowing just 2.5 yards per carry.
Yeah, I guess the best case you can make there is maybe they just throw it short a lot. Like they can't find anybody deep. Maybe he gets a ton of dump offs in this game. He did run 32 routes last week, which is, I mean, that's great for a running back to run 32 routes. And we're expecting them to pass a lot. And we've talked about it several times that, those PPR points are just important in a league like the UFL where fantasy points can be hard to come by. So I can't write him off completely, but at 17% ownership, I imagine I'll be underweight to the field. Probably still going to have at least like 10% just because I do think like those dump off passes, like they might add up in a hurry. Like we see it, in the NFL from time to time where it's just like, all right, Austin Eckler here, 5 targets in a row on a drive just because I can't find anybody else. Wouldn't be that shocking to see Darius Victor like just rack up targets in this game if they're unable to find anybody a little bit deeper. And sometimes defenses kind of give up those short passes to running backs. Maybe I'm wish casting a little bit, but I do think, there's that possibility. So I'm not going to completely X him out, but I do imagine I'll be underweight to 17%.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. For what it's worth, the last time this team played Birmingham, Titus Swen, he started that game. He played 55% of the snaps. So it was a bit of a timeshare, but Swen and Victor did combine for 16 DraftKings points, which is a score you'd be pretty happy with if Victor managed to post it this week because, Swen just won't be very involved. We're anticipating probably 85% of snaps again for Darius Victor. So, again, not really a guy I'm looking to completely X out, but I'll probably only be around 10% here. maybe I'll match the field, but just really hard to get excited about a guy like Darius Victor this week. All right, Neil, any other notes on this game, or are you ready to move on?
No, I think I'm ready to move on.
All right. So our second Saturday game kicks off at 3 p.m. Eastern. It's everyone's favorite team, the Houston Roughnecks at the St. Louis Battlehawks. Houston is a 12-point underdog. Total here is 47.5. To me, this line seems like perfectly in line with our internal numbers. It feels about right to me, just using my brain. Neil, do you have any takes on the spread here?
I'm doing the thing that Trey suggested of muting myself, and I'm so not used to it. So I'm going back and forth. I don't think so. I think probably, again, the under. If I'm taking anything, I would take the under in this game. 47.5, just a really high number. Roughnecks offense. I'm still hopeful that they're going to pound the rock a little bit more this year to slow the game down. So I think all I really like here is the under on 47.5. I kind of like I would probably, if I'm taking one, I'd probably take the points with the Roughnecks again. Just hope that they do slow the game down. But I think my favorite here would probably be the under on 47.5.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. St. Louis has the best pass defense in the UFL so far through 5 weeks, and Houston's defense is pretty good. So I could see things, being a little slow for this one. But to me, this is just a layoff spot. I'm not touching this line. On the injury front, St. Louis is missing 2 of their 5 starting offensive linemen, but Darius Shepard has returned, and he's listed as a starter ahead of Ja'Cour Pearson on the depth chart. The Houston side is clean, but Isaiah Henney will be inactive this week. Starting with the Roughnecks, I wanted to kind of give an explanation, or at least this isn't my explanation. This is Curtis Johnson's explanation for what happened with Mark Thompson in week 5. Obviously, he fielded questions about that post-game. Curtis Johnson said that 2 things happened. The first one was that they were in an immediate deficit. I think he's referencing the 6-0 deficit that they started out in, which, say what you will about that, but that deficit did grow gradually throughout the game. So, maybe we can give them some points there. But he said the real reason they didn't end up playing Mark Thompson is because they want to run out of 12 personnel, which is 1 running back, 2 tight ends. And their blocking tight end, Woody Brandom, got hurt. And I believe he's been placed on IR. I believe he'll be out for the season. So Clint Sig will be the blocking tight end this week. But according to Curtis Johnson, once they lost Woody Brandom, 12 personnel became effectively impossible for them. That's the formation they want to feed Mark Thompson out of. So, that's a very frustrating explanation. I think if Mark Thompson is really your team MVP, you should find ways to get him the ball from every personnel grouping, every formation. But of course, Curtis Johnson is going to do Curtis Johnson things. Whatever costs me the most money, I think, is what Curtis Johnson is going to end up doing here. That said, we can start with the Houston running backs. This is basically the exact same spot as last week, with the exception being that the St. Louis run defense is softer than the Birmingham run defense. You got to think eventually Houston is going to come to their senses and start feeding Mark Thompson the ball. Maybe they'll be able to keep the game a little close and feed Mark Thompson the ball. I wrote him up for the 4th week in a row in my article, trying to sort of make a bit of an upside case. We have him at 4% ownership right now. I still see a very strong ceiling here, but Houston needs to overperform. You probably would want to pair him with the Houston defense if you play him. I imagine I'm going to play him on 10 or 15% of my teams and just chalk those up as a loss, most likely. But, maybe we get the best workload in the UFL, or right there is the best workload in the UFL at 4% ownership. Man, I just have a hard time not playing some Mark Thompson, because we got to think a huge game's going to come eventually. Hard to argue it's going to be this week, given we expect Houston to be in negative game script. That does lend itself to more TJ Pledger. But Neil, what do you think? Can you talk me off of playing Mark Thompson and just throwing my money away? Most likely.
I don't think I can. I think that I am right there with you on Mark Thompson once again, just falling for this trap. Again, last week, as I said, I pounded my fist for Mark Thompson. I said I thought he was the best play on the slate. I felt pretty strong about that after Curtis Johnson came out and said, we want to get him 20 to 25 carries. I guess want is one of those, like, we can't control what's going to happen. We would wish that he gets 20 to 25 carries. Yeah, that was so upsetting because they were giving the ball to TJ Pledger. Like TJ Pledger was still getting carries for whatever reason. But after he comes out, first of all, at halftime, the previous game comes out and says, oh, we just need to give Mark Thompson the ball. We're going to pound the rock. And then he comes out and says, we want to get him 20 to 25 carries. You kind of felt like, okay, he knows what he has in Mark Thompson. He wants to get this guy the ball. And then last week, I guess they weren't able to do it last week. This week, hopefully they come in better prepared. And at 4%, I'm going right back there to Mark Thompson, 8,200. The price tag is reasonable there. He ran 17 routes. He had four carries for 11 yards. TJ Pledger's 6 carries. Man, it's I'm having some PTSD right now, but I still think I'm going right back there to Mark Thompson. 4% is just too low for a guy that in a game where they should be wanting to run the ball to slow the game down. That's really their only shot at winning this game, is if they do slow the game down. So yeah, I'm in. Hopefully they run it early and often and doesn't burn us. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see myself get to 20% Mark Thompson or even higher.
Yeah, I think 15 to 20% could be pretty easily where I end up here, and that makes me not super happy. I mean, I did note on last week's show that Curtis Johnson is the biggest liar among UFL coaches, but even I didn't think he would be lying about stuff like this. I mean, just to complain a little bit more, at the end of last week's game, they benched Reed Sinnett. And yet Mark Thompson stayed in. There was actually a carry where he came up a little gimpy and the announcers were freaking out. They were like, why is he still in the game? This doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is just classic Curtis Johnson, by far the worst coach in the UFL. Mike Nolan for the Michigan Panthers should be very, very happy that Curtis Johnson exists, because he looks like an absolute saint of a coach compared to this guy. So I think that's enough on the Houston running back situation. Fair to say me and Neil are both going to be overweight for Mark Thompson, because we just love the punishment of Curtis Johnson doing exactly what he should not. The passing game here is pretty interesting, and it's gotten a little more condensed. I think, we can very clearly say that Justin Hall and Kiki Chisholm are the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2, respectively. Reed Sinnett is probably going to have to drop back a ton. The issue, like I said, is the matchup. St. Louis is barely allowing more than 150 passing yards per game, easily the toughest in the UFL. Yeah, Neil, I'm curious on your thoughts here. I would imagine, pretty much every Reed Sinnett double stack is going to have Hall and Chisholm. Is there sort of any way you can mix those up, or would you be fine with that given we only have Sinnett projected for 5% ownership?
Yeah, I think I'm fine with it. We've got Sinnett at 5%. I think that I screwed up my street here because I have Justin Hall at 3%, and I don't think that's right.
32 is the number we have.
Okay. I'm missing a number in there. I thought that was the case. We had him pretty chalky. So he is fairly chalky. Kiki Chisholm also at 20%. I think you could mix in Braden Bowman ran 32 routes last week, saw 4 targets. That's a little bit interesting. I think he's in play in your Reed Sinnett stacks. Probably not playing him outside of Reed Sinnett. I guess he's 3,100, so you could use him as a value option in some lineups outside there. Anthony Ratliff Williams, 26 routes run last week. So I think that there are guys that you could. I think those two are probably not playing. Cyril Grayson and Emmanuel Butler, like theoretically in an MME set you could consider, but again, these field sizes are not that large where I think that's necessary. So probably in my Reed Sinnett stacks, I'm probably just going to Justin Hall and or Kiki Chisholm, maybe not even both. And I do think that 5% is our projected ownership for Reed Sinnett. I would guess I end up slightly overweight to the field there, but not going all in on Reed Sinnett, but I would guess that I take an overweight stand there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he came in a point or two lower than what we have projected. I think the narrative that this is a very tough pass defense, one, it's probably true, but more so than that, I think that could pick up a little bit of steam. I do like your call on Bowman. I think if I was going to get cute with any of these ancillary options, it would probably be him, just because the routes are there. And we know, we haven't seen it a ton with Houston, but we do know that teams like to throw the ball to their tight ends in the red zone. So maybe he could fall into the end zone for you. And that's really all you need at 3,100. This wide receiver 3 rotation is just pretty gross between Emmanuel Butler, Cyril Grayson, and Ratliff Williams. Butler's the best value, but yeah, I just really don't like any of these guys when we don't have a great grip on, total routes. And I just don't, I really don't see the team scheming up many targets for these guys. It's clear Justin Hall's the first read on pretty much everything. And when he isn't, it's Kiki Chisholm, especially in the red zone. All right, Neil, anything else on the Roughnecks? I think we got them covered here.
No, I think that we covered them pretty well. I don't think I'm playing any TJ Pledger, even though he did get those 10 opportunities last week, which was more than anticipated. I still think I'm probably laying off there. I guess you could make the argument for TJ Pledger just based on like if they really are just like following the game script and they're going to need to be throwing the ball a lot against the Battlehawks. I mean, TJ Pledger did run 19 routes along with his 6 rush attempts last week. Actually, I didn't. Who was listed as the starter? Have they come out with the?
It's TJ Pledger. So there you go. Same as the last 2 weeks. Again, I'm not sure how much that matters because we have seen in previous weeks TJ Pledger starts the first half, Mark Thompson starts the second half.
Yeah,
that's happened the last 2 weeks. So again, I don't think Curtis Johnson cares about the depth chart very much. Yeah. I could really see anything. I could see a full bell cow game for Mark Thompson where he plays 75% of snaps. I could see similar for TJ Pledger. It's really tough. I think my biggest issue with Pledger is that I would imagine in most scenarios, once they get inside the 10, they would try to sub in Mark Thompson to steal the touchdown. That said, you could argue that come the second half, they're going to be down by so much that they're just going to have to go as fast as possible, won't have time to sub. That could lead to some TJ Pledger touchdowns, but he's tricky to make an upside argument for when I just don't think his touchdown equity is very good.
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. I don't think you need to go there with TJ Pledger. It might be too cute. I think he's right on the border of too cute just because you can see the game script. And, like we saw last week, they wanted to give 20-25 carries to Mark Thompson, and then they just couldn't do it. Well, if they're just going to be, play into game scripts, whatever it is, against this St. Louis Battlehawks team that should put up a lot of points, like I could see a path similar to Darius Victor, where it's just like he might get a lot of dump offs where it adds those PPR points adds up, and he's just 6,200, so he could get there. It wouldn't be that shocking to me to see TJ Pledger just get to 15-16 fantasy points on volume. Now, whether that's enough in the current landscape of running backs, I'm not sure. In weeks 1 through 3, I think you would take those 15-16 fantasy points. Now we've gotten to kind of a different landscape for running backs, so I probably won't have much, if any. Maybe I'll have a share. I was just thinking if he was not listed as a starter, I would completely write off TJ Pledger. The fact that he's listed as a starter, like they did give him the first crack last week, which was kind of surprising. So we'll probably get some opportunities, but I think I wouldn't play him unless you're MMEing.
Yeah. I think you need to be making a pretty decent amount of teams to get to a guy like TJ Pledger, and like Neil said, there are just better options this week. One of those options is on the St. Louis Battlehawks. This is the best offense in spring football history. I said that I thought it would be right there as that right there with the 2020 Houston Roughnecks, 2023 DC Defenders as the best modern spring football offense ever. And yeah, they've just looked awesome, incredibly deep at wide receiver, obviously, but they've also found their bell cow running back in Jacob Sailors. Sailors has led all UFL running backs in weighted opportunity in back-to-back weeks. He's looked great, around a 70% snap share, 70% route share. He's ripping off, 5+ yards per carry. He's hyper efficient because, like I say every show, St. Louis does a really good job spreading out their wide receivers. They get a lot of too high safety looks, leads to light boxes for a guy like Jacob Sailors. Of course, the holes that you can poke in Sailors are that, one, the team has no problem subbing in Wayne Gallman in the red zone. We saw that last week. He stole a touchdown. And then also with how big the spread is, you could argue that, a blowout is a real risk to Sailors, total production. At the same time, St. Louis pulled the starters last week. Sailors still got you 16.9 DraftKings points and still led all running backs in weighted opportunity. You could also argue McCarron's just going to suck up all the touchdowns because St. Louis tends to be more pass heavy in the red zone. That said, they've been a little bit more run heavy in the red zone this season compared to 2023. Neil, I imagine Jacob Sailors is a guy you'll be pretty interested in. We don't have him as mega chalk, but right around 37%. I think that makes a lot of sense. Oh, Neil's muted. We got him.
Got me. All right. 37% does seem totally fine to me. If I had to guess, I would guess I come in a little bit underweight just because he is 8,800. So like the paths to failure, like you need a little bit more to pay off 8,800. So we don't have the cheap Jacob Sailors anymore. Now he's expensive, getting 37% ownership. Probably needs a touchdown to get you there, or at least the 100-yard bonus, something along those lines. You're going to need, I don't know, at least like 18 fantasy points, I would say, to pay off 8,800 for Jacob Sailors, which is asking kind of a lot. So I do think that he's in the best spot you can ask for a running back in this offense. Pretty good matchup against the Roughnecks, but he does need to actually put up fantasy points to pay off this price tag. So probably underweight slightly to Jacob Sailors, but yeah, it's hard to argue with a running back who seems to be pretty good and is in, as you say, like one of the best offenses of all time in spring football. So I'm not going to be not shorting him by too much.
Yeah. I'm in a similar boat. I imagine I'll match the field. Might end up a little bit overweight. He's, going to be a really hard guy to fade, obviously, but like Neil said, he is a little expensive. So, anything short of probably 15 fantasy points for Sailors, and we would likely see another running back end up being optimal this week. With the passing game, I think this is one of the best weeks we've seen to play AJ McCarron doubles. I'm not sure. I was about to play around with them. I'm not sure if triples are going to be very possible given how pricing looks this week. But, we have McCarron at 17% ownership, which is one of his lowest numbers of the season. That seems pretty reasonable to me. But more importantly than that, we all know the field's going to want to play Hakeem Butler after his massive game last week. We can assume the field's going to want to play Ja'Cory Pearson, given that he's looked really good. He led all players in targets 2 weeks ago. But guys like Marcel Aitman and Darius Shepard, I do not think are going to draw much ownership. Aitman's a guy I'm much more excited to play because we know what the role is there. He's going to be playing outside. He's going to be getting basically every route. Darius Shepard is a very, very difficult projection. Me and Chris spent, I don't even know, 30 minutes debating it over Discord messages this morning. But Darius Shepard led all players in targets through the first 2 weeks of the season. He's a very talented receiver. He's, still a guy St. Louis will want to involve in their offense, even though they've had Ja'Cory Pearson emerge and obviously have other great receivers. Yeah, Neil, I imagine this is a spot where you're going to be looking to take advantage of some of these low-owned plays because, to me, Aitman and Shepard feel great to mix into McCarron double stacks here.
Yeah, wheels up for this offense at this level of ownership. Definitely into a 17% owned AJ McCarron, even though he projects significantly worse than Adrian Martinez. I think the floor is actually higher for AJ McCarron. And I think the ceiling is definitely lower than Adrian Martinez, but it's not that much lower because he's the kind of quarterback who could put up 300 yards one of these games if they do get into that. He's had a couple games where he had 37 pass attempts, 45 pass attempts. Now last week only had 24 pass attempts, but still 213 yards in that game. Just if this team does air it out, he's one of the few quarterbacks who wouldn't be that shocking to see him get to that 300-yard bonus. So yeah, I'm high on AJ McCarron this week, in part because 17% ownership for AJ McCarron is nice, but as you said, 3% Marcel Aitman is lunacy. 27 routes run last week. Now only saw 2 targets, but I think that was an outlier for Marcel Aitman. I like him quite a bit at 3% ownership at 7,700. Darius Shepard, yeah, I agree. Like it is really hard to read to know what to expect from Darius Shepard, but at 2% ownership, I'm willing to just make the assumption that he's going to get back to the usage that he's had kind of all year as one of the highest usage receivers in the league. So in on Aitman at 3%, going to be overweight to the field there. In on Shepard at 2%, going to be overweight to the field there. And even Hakeem Butler, 17% feels a little bit light to me. I'll probably be a little bit overweight to the field there. And Ja'Cory Pearson as well. He only ran 21 routes last week, but 2 weeks ago he had 10 targets on like 21 routes. So he's a guy that I think they want to get involved as well. It's just those 4 for me. Of course, this is going to be the week now that they have Darius Shepard back. Blake Jackson's going to run 40 routes again and just break my heart. But no, I'm only playing those 4: Marcel Aitman, Darius Shepard, Hakeem Butler, Ja'Cory Pearson. But I think I'm going to be I would guess over 10% on each of Aitman, Shepard, Pearson, and over 20% on Hakeem Butler, most likely.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll probably end up bumping Aitman a little bit after the show, but there's just no way he gets to double digits with the way the rest of this slate is looking in terms of ownership. And for those wondering about sort of what happened with Ja'Cory Pearson's usage last week, I had a bit of a lengthy sort of ball knower take on it in my article, but essentially, Pearson left the game for about half a quarter due to cramps. The Battlehawks also rested their starters for the final 6 minutes of the fourth quarter. So he really only had an opportunity to play about 3/4 of the game there. Also, DC runs a ton of press man coverage. Pearson was playing outside for about 30% of his routes, which is a little confusing. That's more of Darius Shepard's game. He's a capable slot, capable outside receiver. Pearson's more of a slot. And, you know, when you're heavily involved in quick game stuff like screens, quick passes, immediate first reads, like Ja'Cour Pearson is, press man coverage tends to throw you off of that, especially when you're playing outside on the line of scrimmage. So that would sort of be, you know, the variety of reasons I would use to explain his usage last week. Not really anything I'm concerned about for this week. So I'd say it's wheels up for basically all of these St. Louis Battlehawks receivers. Obviously, though, Darius Shepard has the largest potential range of outcomes here. Could see anything from, you know, a 50% route share being totally uninvolved to, you know, out there for 85% of routes and, you know, maybe 10 targets. So that's certainly something you would want to take advantage of if you are playing some of the largest tournaments of the slate. And I know that I will be playing some Darius Shepard in my own teams. I think we've covered everything here. I think that's it. Yeah. Blake Jackson really isn't in play. The team's so beat up on the offensive line, or they were last week, that they mentioned the possibility of Kamari Averett playing tackle, their tight end too. That's, again, not really a concern this week. They're dressing 7 offensive linemen, so I wouldn't be too worried about it. But it was something I mentioned in my article, if only because I thought it was a little silly. Oh, Wayne Gallman for Showdown, I think, is like a really strong play. No one's going to want to touch him because he's super gross. But in the event that this game's a blowout, I mean, he could get a full quarter as, you know, the lead running back is basically a bell cow for the fourth quarter. And he could also steal a touchdown in there. So I do kind of like Wayne Gallman as a Showdown play if you're playing the Showdown slate here. All right. So we can now move on to the Sunday slate. Sunday slate kicks off at 1 p.m. Eastern. We actually have a pretty good 2-game slate here. They ran back the $15K prize pool, $5K to first contest. So that's certainly good news. I imagine that will overlay, and this will probably be our last week of 5K to first on Sunday only. But either way, slate kicks off at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday with the Arlington Renegades at the Michigan Panthers. Arlington is a 4-point underdog to Michigan. Total here is 42. To me, much like this last game, this line seems pretty much perfectly in line with our model, my own expectations. Neil, do you have any takes on betting for this game?
Not really. I don't have a real strong opinion here. I think that if I were going to bet anything, probably the over would be where I would lean, but it's a tough spot for the Arlington offense, so I don't feel that. No, I think it's probably just a stay away for me.
Yep. That is where I am at as well. With injuries, I was searching all over. I don't think Thursday injury reports have been posted for these teams. I will obviously keep my eye out. Be sure to update everyone in the Discord, but we should get inactives and depth charts tonight. So on the Arlington side, Tyler Vaughn's dealing with a hamstring. He did not practice on Wednesday. I rechecked the game film. He finished the game in week 5, so I really don't have much concern here unless this injury happened in practice. But we should find out about his status tonight. Letty Brown's dealing with a hamstring. Day Hunter is dealing with a chest issue. They were both limited on Wednesday, but I tentatively expect both to play and be fine. The Michigan side is essentially clean. Jonathan Hightower still dealing with that ankle. He still is not practicing. And Marcus Sims is dealing with the back issue that he's been listed as having for weeks now. He's limited, but is fully expected to play. I mean, Sims has barely practiced during the season and is still out there for a full-time ride share every week. So really wouldn't be concerned about him. All right, starting with the Arlington side, obviously we expect Tyler Vaughn's to play. It would really change things if Vaughn's ended up sitting, which again would be a big surprise. I have a hard time getting behind this offense right now. We see Javonta Payton's price has been increased pretty dramatically to 6,200. Vaughn's remains a strong value. I don't know. I'm having a tough time here. It was encouraging to see Deontay Burnett's route share jump all the way up to, I believe, 87% this week, which was his highest of the season. Neil, do you have any strong takes on this Arlington passing attack?
I'm debating if I'm going to have any of it. From a volume standpoint, it is fairly consistent. I mean, they've thrown the ball at least 28 times every week, so there is that. I think that Luis Perez leads the league in yardage so far. They just haven't really gotten a ton of touchdowns. I definitely am going to be playing some of the receivers. I'll probably end up with some of Luis Perez. But yeah, Tyler Vaughn's, I mean, if he's in, it's hard to fade Tyler Vaughn's. 39 routes run, 7 more targets last week caught 5 of them for 45 yards. The volume has been really nice for Tyler Vaughn's, even at 29%. Hard fade there. So I'm in on Tyler Vaughn's, probably a little bit underweight to 29%, but I think that it's, not far off. Sal Cannella, 5,800. We got him at just 8% ownership, ran 32 routes, saw 8 targets last week. So just really nice volume. I'm going back to the Sal Cannella. JP Payton got there last week. I'm actually shocked that we're not anticipating the field chasing him. I wouldn't be surprised to see the field chase him a little bit more than we've got him at just 5% ownership, but elite last week. 37 routes run, 9 targets for JP Payton, 7 receptions, 119 yards and a touchdown. Those are elite numbers, and like both the underlying metrics and the actual output there were elite for JP Payton, and he's still 6,200. So at 5%, I would jam him. I suspect he's going to be a little bit, probably 10-15 would be my guess. At which point I'm probably going to be closer to the field, maybe still slightly over. And then I'm going back to Deontay Burnett. I was in on very in on Burnett last week, based on his output from the previous week, where they seemed to target him more as the game went on. And he didn't really do anything for me. Ran 34 routes, saw 5 targets, but caught just 3 of them for 18 yards. But still, 5 targets in the UFL is not too bad. 34 routes run is very good. So I think you can play any and all of Tyler Vaughn, Sal Cannella, JP Payton, Deontay Burnett. I'm not playing anybody else from this team, but I will have shares of all of them. And my guess would be I come in overweight to the field on Sal Cannella, JP Payton, Deontay Burnett, slightly under to Tyler Vaughn's. Sometimes I feel like a broken record. I'm usually underweight to chalk, overweight, spread out my exposures to be a little bit overweight to the not chalk when you get guys who have decent opportunities. And that's probably my approach here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. For what it's worth, I mean, week after week after week, I've been checking these simulation tools. Luis Perez double and triple stacks have been looking really, really good from a simulated ROI perspective. Yeah. Not sure they've really gotten you there from an actual ROI perspective, but for me, I'll probably end up making 40, 45 teams for the main GPP. I imagine I'll throw out some Luis Perez double stacks, if only because the sim tools just absolutely love this guy. I think Burnett, after Tyler Vaughn's, Burnett to me is pretty clearly the next best receiving talent on the team. So he's certainly a guy I'd like to take shots on. And yeah, I mean, with this price increase for Javonte Payton, I really can't see him getting up to double-digit ownership. I mean, I could maybe see 8 or 9%, but anything beyond that, I think would genuinely surprise me here. And for what it's worth, if Tyler Vaughn sits, pay close attention to who is active between Lawan Winningham and Isaiah Winstead. It could be both, and it could just be a gross rotation on the outside where they don't throw to those guys and they just end up throwing to a lot more to Payton and Burnett. But if Lawan Winningham was listed as a starter and Isaiah Winstead was somehow inactive and, Vaughn's doesn't play, Lawan Winningham would be, pretty easily the best value of the slate. Just wanted to throw that out there because there have been a few surprise inactives that we haven't covered on the show. So just in case, I expect Vaughn's to play, but just in case, keep an eye on that. Can always check our projections, and I'll be giving my takes in Discord if anything happens there. This backfield to me, Letty Brown and Day Hunter are dealing with minor injuries. Again, I said I tentatively expect them to play. Last week, though, it was a 3-headed monster. Day Hunter earned 38% of snaps, Davion Smith 31%, Letty Brown 31%. I mean, this is like, these guys are completely untouchable if all 3 are active. Neil, do you disagree at all?
No, I don't think I disagree at all. I don't think that I am likely to go here at all. If I'm going anywhere, it would be Letty Brown. I think he did have I guess just 5 rush attempts to Day Hunter's 9, but he ran 14 routes, saw 4 targets last week. Still, I don't think I'm going here. Most likely it's just to stay away.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think they still prefer Letty Brown as the pass catching back. So in a scenario where, Arlington's playing catch up, final few minutes of the fourth quarter, it should be all Letty Brown and he could sneak a touchdown in there for you. At the same time, though, I mean, he's priced at 6,600. That's tough. If he was, 4,500, 5K, I'd be pretty excited to take some shots on him. But yeah, it's really tough with the backfield being a very gross 3-way split. I also thought of a fantastic player comp for Day Hunter for our real XFL grinders from last year. It's TJ Hammonds. These guys are the exact same player. Elite agility, fantastic lateral quickness, but as soon as they get hit, they fly backwards, 0 contact balance. So I had to get that in. That is my player comp for Day Hunter. All right, moving on here to the Michigan Panthers side. I have a lot of interest in the Panthers this week. I think this is a really interesting team from a DFS perspective. Obviously, that starts with Danny Etling. I was kind of hoping none of the other sites would be on Etling. I have seen some bigger numbers out there for Etling than even what we have posted, and I really like Danny Etling. He's throwing the ball deep, 20 yards or more, at the highest rate in the UFL. He has the highest average depth of target in the UFL. He's an eager runner. We know he'll get rushing opportunities inside the red zone. I mean, EJ Perry was averaging 11 rushing fantasy points per game. Obviously, that was buoyed up a little bit by the 4 rushing touchdowns he scored, but still, we have a pretty solid understanding of the rushing potential from the Michigan Panthers quarterbacks in this offense. And that obviously applies to a guy like Danny Etling. And then at wide receiver, to me, we have a very clear pecking order now. Marcus Sims is still the wide receiver 1 here. I've, said in Discord before, he has one play every week where he looks exactly like AJ Brown. And it generally goes for an 80-yard touchdown, or at least, a play where he gets 40 yards and just can't be tackled. Trey Quinn, I think, is, maybe not complete dust in this offense, but when the team's only averaging 34 pass plays per game, which is last in the UFL, or tied for last, a guy like Trey Quinn, who's getting these lower ADOT slot routes and isn't heavily involved in the red zone, it's really, really hard to make a ceiling argument for him. But we also have my boy COC Mariner, who I mentioned in previous weeks as a potential emerging star among these Michigan Panthers wide receivers. So COC Mariner, 23%, 23% route share last week, 68% route share in week 5. Sorry, I have a bunch of notifications happening on my computer right now. And then an 85% route share in week 5. I got that wrong, but it was 23% week 3, 68% week 4, 85% week 5. So that's, very encouraging. He also led the team with a 33% target share last week. Fortunately, that translated to just 6 targets because, again, they really aren't dropping back much. They don't have to. The ground game, pretty competent here. Neil, I'll throw it over to you. Any interest in Danny Etling? And then my question is, do you want to handle stacking here? Single stacks seem fine. I think he's right there with Adrian Martinez as a quarterback that you can play without any stacking partners because he has shown so much as a runner, and they're just not dropping back that much. And I also think you can double stack him. I mean, pretty clearly with Marcus Sims and or COC Mariner, and you could maybe argue for Trey Quinn or Cole Hicatini in there, but those plays seem a little thin to me.
Yeah, so the hard thing with this offense is they've peaked at 33 pass attempts. That's the most pass attempts that they've ever thrown in a game. And the second most that they've thrown is 24 in a game. The past 3 weeks, just 21 in week 5, 14 in week 4. Actually, maybe one of these weeks they have more than I'm looking at because it was split between, it was actually 27 in that week. So it was 14 for Etling, 13 for EJ Perry, but then 19 the week prior for EJ Perry. They just don't pass a ton. They rarely get to 30 pass attempts in a game, which means they kind of need to be really efficient to get 2 receivers there. So I'm probably generally in my Danny Etling stacks just single stacking, and honestly I'm probably not playing a ton of Danny Etling just because he is at 8,800, just not throwing the ball quite enough to get there. They have a couple games, I guess, where EJ Perry got over 200 yards passing and got there on the ground. I mean, EJ Perry's had two games with multiple rushing touchdowns. Danny Etling had a rushing touchdown last week, so there is that rushing upside, but just the fact that he's unlikely to bring along 2 or 3 receivers, makes me a little bit less inclined to get there. Just I kind of want to take my bets elsewhere. So my guess is I end up underweight to the 13% on Danny Etling. I get why you want to be in there. It's a nice spot here against the Renegades, not one of the better defenses in the league, and the Renegades can put up points, so maybe they need to put up points to keep up with them. But I don't think I'm going to be playing a ton of Danny Etling at 8,800 and 13% ownership. When I do, I think Marcus Sims, Trey Quinn, COC Mariner are kind of the only players that I'm going to here. I guess you could consider Cole Hicatini. He's just 3,400. So, kind of in play. But for the most part, it's going to be Sims, Trey Quinn, COC Mariner. And probably my order here would be Sims, COC Mariner, Trey Quinn. When you factor in the salary, as you said, I think I remember you in Discord lamenting that COC Mariner last week was a very sharp play at 3% ownership. You notice a lot of the sharps had way more of COC Mariner than the rest of the field did, and now the ownership is going to be there, unfortunately. So even though I think we got there right on time, it just didn't pan out for us when we needed it to. But I think he's still a good play at 19% ownership at 4,100.
Yeah, I feel like I'm living Groundhog Day with some of these, lower priced wide receivers where I'm on them a week early and then they get steamed a little bit and then they go off. Seems to be COC Mariner this week, at least in terms of ownership. And yeah, Neil touched on a great point. Something that I forgot to mention with the Etling sort of bull case argument is that this Arlington defense is terrible. They're allowing the most yards per attempt in the league, the most total yards per game in the league, and their PFF's lowest graded pass rush alongside a bottom 3 graded coverage unit. So this should be a very good spot for Etling. I think the biggest obstacle to Etling, though, he's a guy who I see with just like tremendous volatility in terms of his total scores. If any quarterback could play a full game and give you like a 6-point score, it would be a guy like Danny Etling. But I could also see, a really good ceiling here again, because he's a willing runner. He's throwing deep a ton against a really bad defense. But I think the biggest obstacle is going to be this backfield. We saw a great game from Matthew Colburn and Wes Hills this past week. And you look ahead, playing this Arlington defense, they're a bad pass defense, but they are an awful run defense. They're allowing 5 yards per carry. That's 1.1 more yards per carry than the second worst run defense. We're going to get positive game script. Michigan isn't a great team. There aren't many games where they will be favored. This is one of them. I could see a healthy dose of both Matthew Colburn and Wes Hills. Again, like I said last week, Hills is the guy you want to target in more positive game script, Colburn in more negative game script. But even so, I could see either one of these guys, maybe both, getting there in a positive game script scenario. Colburn projects as a pretty solid value. I think if you're going to dip below the 7K range at running back, Colburn really stands out to me, and it seems like industry-wide as well. Neil, what's sort of your take on this backfield here?
Yeah, I got to say, Jake, your call on Wes Hills last week, you pointed out that, the week prior, he didn't really do anything, but you pointed out last week, well, that was kind of based on the game script. And if they are in a game script where they can run more, maybe they go to Wes Hills more. Maybe they go back to him and people are making an assumption that they're going to go to Matthew Colburn. And man, that worked out. 3 rushing touchdowns, 82 yards last week for Wes Hills. So I was happy to be overweight to the field on Wes Hills, and I wasn't planning on getting to any until we had that conversation. So that was a great call out by you last week on Wes Hills. Of course, he was not in any of my good lineups, so did not work out for me anyway, but love that call out last week. And I think, this week, again, like you say, this is a spot where Michigan may be able to keep the ball on the ground. And if they keep the ball on the ground, Wes Hills, we had said it early in the year, he's one of the few running backs in the league who has the upside for 100 yards on the ground. I still think that is there for Wes Hills. Even with Colburn, I mean, he also had 15 rush attempts last week, ran 15 routes, both very involved. The price discrepancy is, they should be basically the same price, in my opinion. Wes Hills, they both, they had basically identical opportunities last week, other than, I guess, Wes Hills getting 3 of the 4 rushing touchdowns, more red zone opportunities. But we do get the ownership discount because Wes Hills is 9,000, Matt Colburn is 6,500. I probably end up overweight to 6% on Wes Hills, but not by a ton. I don't think I'm going to get to more than 10%. I'm guessing, speculating right now what I'm going to do. And then Colburn, I think 18%, totally reasonable, fair, probably going to be close to that.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense here. Really, I want to play both guys. Wes Hills, not going to draw a ton of ownership because he is so expensive. I think a lot of people would just Jacob Sailors is a much easier click because you can see him getting there in a lot of different scenarios. But yeah, Wes Hills and Matt Colburn might only need 5 carries each to hit the 100-yard bonus against this just disastrous Arlington rush defense. So certainly some guys that I will want to target here. Neil, do you have anything else on this game before we move on to our final game of the slate?
No, let's move on.
All right. Our final game this week is the San Antonio Brahmas at the DC Defenders. This game kicks off Sunday at 4 p.m. San Antonio is favored by 1.5 points. It actually opened with DC as a 1-point favorite pretty quickly got bet down in favor of San Antonio. Total here is 42. Once again, like the last few games, this is another one where our model, my own thoughts kind of line up with the Vegas line. I'm not seeing a ton of value here. Neil, do you see anything you like?
Sorry, had to unmute myself. Yeah, obviously, Brahma bitches. Once again, we're going right back to the Brahmas. DC has given up the most points in the entire UFL so far. I think the Brahmas look pretty good still with Quentin Dormady there. Of course, I think he threw 3 interceptions last week. I don't think that's going to happen all that often. So yeah, I'm on the Brahmas once again. As far as the line, 43. Yeah, I don't see anything really with the line. I'm on the Brahmas at Brahmas -2.
Yeah, I guess if I had to pick, I can't fade our Brahmas, but exactly. that would be the only spot I'd be in. Fun fact: if AJ Smith wins the next 2 games, or it actually might only be next week against Houston, he'll be the only coach ever to beat every single XFL branded team. I thought that was a pretty fun little stat. Okay, so Quentin Dormady is a guy who, you look at our projections, we're not particularly high on him, especially relative to the rest of the industry. And it's not that we don't love Dormady. It's just that, the team's been a little bit more run heavy since he became the quarterback. And his underlying passing stats haven't been great. I think Garbers is just a better player, at least based on what we've seen so far. That said, kind of similar to St. Louis, ownership's looking a lot flatter on the San Antonio wide receivers relative to previous weeks. We don't get any, single digit ownership numbers, at least based on our projections right now. We've got Justin Smith, the lowest owned at 10%, Stevenson and Latimer around 17%, and then John Trey Kirkland around 24%, still significantly lower than what we've seen in previous weeks. I certainly have some interest in Dormady double stacks. It's a lot easier to work triples in as well, given that Justin Smith is only 5,100. So Neil, I'm kind of curious on your thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, the fewest pass attempts this team has had in any game this year is 25 pass attempts in week 1 for Chase Garbers. We saw Quentin Dormady air it out 37 times last week. Did throw the 3 interceptions in that game, but listening to Wade Phillips on his radio spot this week, he noted that 2 of them bounced off the receiver's hands. They weren't really poorly thrown balls. They should have been caught, or at least should not have been knocked up into the air and intercepted. So I don't think that he's really taken the blame there for the interceptions. Did throw, again, 37 times, 269 yards last week for Quentin Dormady. Now going up against a defense that has given up the most points in the league at 18%. I do think, even though I agree with you, like this is a team that wants to run the ball, I'll probably have a mix of, I'll probably be overweight to the field on both facets of our Brahmas this week. Both the run game and the pass game, I think, look pretty spicy here. I think the ownership looks pretty reasonable on both. Now, none of the receivers are super low owned anymore for the Brahmas. You're not getting anybody at single digits ownership, but they're also all, I'd say, pretty reasonable. 10% to Justin Smith seems fair. 24% to John Trey Kirkland, just given his role, like how many targets he gets every single game, even at 10,700. I think that's a totally fine ownership number. And then, of course, Stevenson, Latimer, both still running an elite number of routes, both seeing targets pretty consistently every game. Now, kind of down to just 4 targets for Stevenson last game, 3 for Cody Latimer, but that's a game where they only threw the ball 30 times, which is their second lowest of the year. So, yeah, I think that all of these guys are fair. Of course, they're also more expensive than they were earlier in the year. So, probably not going like way over the field on any individual of pass catcher here, but probably slightly overweight to the field on all. And my guess is I end up 20 to 25% Dormady, so slightly over the field.
Yeah, for what it's worth on Marquez Stevenson, I honestly think you can throw 2 out of his last 3 games out. Since week 3, he's only averaged about 7.5 receiving fantasy points per game. That ranks 22nd among all players. But in week 3, he lost a contact for at least half a quarter. I'm honestly not sure if he ever got that contact issue fixed. So you could argue for throwing that game out. You could argue for not. But week 5, he was noticeably limping the entire game. Did not show up on the injury report this week, so I think he's fine. But he was clearly dealing with something, probably an ankle sprain, something minor that was impacting his ability to get open last week. I've been going back and forth in my head as to what I think the ball knower take is with these wide receivers. I mean, we know what DC is going to do. They're going to blitz a lot. They're going to play a lot of press man coverage. I think, my argument for Marquez Stevenson, like I said, is that you can kind of just ignore his recent poor production lately. But, I think with the amount of press that DC plays, you could make a pretty good case for a guy like Justin Smith. Last week, we saw Hakeem Butler go off because AJ McCarron was just tossing him up these jump balls down the field. Hakeem Butler isn't really a separator, but Justin Smith can, generate multiple yards of separation on these go routes. And when he has, guys like Garyon Conley pressed up against him, I could definitely see some longer passes or longer receptions from a guy like Justin Smith. So yeah, Neil, do you have like a clear cut favorite receiver here? Or is this really just, you're playing 8, 10, 12 Dormady lineups and kind of just mix and matching?
I think largely the latter, a lot of mix and match. I mean, we noted that it's possible that Quentin Dormady, because of his ability to throw the ball deep, is the quarterback who could open up Justin Smith. Now, last week didn't really get there, but led the team once again in routes run and saw 4 targets. So I do think that he's going to have more spike weeks with Quentin Dormady at quarterback as opposed to Chase Garbers. And I do like, kind of, as you said, that the fact that the maybe the defenders blitz a little bit, maybe more opportunities to just air it out, throw it downfield. So I do think Justin Smith probably my favorite when you factor in the 10% ownership and the $5,100 price tag, because all the other receivers are, $7,100 Cody Latimer up to $10,700 John Kirkland. So factoring in the price tag and the setup, the ownership, I think Justin Smith probably my favorite here. John Kirkland, obviously, 10,700. That's a price that it's a high price, but also he sees 9-10 targets, feels like every game. So I think it's worth it to pay there. So yeah, I guess everything accounted for, probably Justin Smith my favorite, but for the most part, it's just I'm going to be a little bit overweight to all of them. I'll mix and match them.
Yeah, and I mean, with Kirkland, even though he does get a ton of quick game looks, I mean, the team's just going to find a way to get him the ball no matter what. And I think, you could probably argue that I'm just overanalyzing with the way DC plays defense and all that, because, our boy AJ Smith is going to account for the way DC plays defense and is still going to find a way to get his guys the ball. To me, I think week after week, I've kind of just been more anxious to play Kirkland, Stevenson, even Justin Smith than I am Cody Latimer. I think Latimer has lost a bit of a step. He's still a great receiver, but I just don't see as compelling of a ceiling with Latimer. But, I'll still have some exposure. I'll have quite a few Dormady doubles and triples, I'm sure. Triples here are significantly easier than they are with St. Louis. So there is that as well. With the backfield here, I did forget to note injuries. This game's almost completely clean, but Anthony McFarland still hasn't practiced due to his shoulder injury. I don't expect him to play, but this is something we want to keep an eye on, especially because the team actually cut Bryson Aline this week. So they might expect Anthony McFarland to be back. If that's the case and they keep McFarland, Lovett, and Morgan Ellison as their 3 backs, I mean, I just don't think you can touch this backfield almost at all. I would still argue that John Lovett has the best touchdown equity in the backfield. I think he's their inside the 5 guy pretty clearly if those are the 3 running backs. But Morgan Ellison has looked great. We know the team wants to involve Anthony McFarland, especially in the receiving game. Neil, any takes on this backfield? If Anthony McFarland's in, are these guys dust? And then if Anthony McFarland's out, we can assume John Lovett will probably be the second most popular running back on the slate, behind, of course, Jacob Sailors.
I actually love these running backs. This is maybe my favorite spot when you account for ownership, maybe my favorite spot on the slate. And you may have anticipated this, Jake, because the one note that I added to our spreadsheet is a quote from Wade Phillips when he was asked on his radio spot, why did you run the ball so much last week? Essentially, like, did you just see something? Did you think you were going to be able to beat them on the ground because of their run defense? And his response to that question was, no, they had played all right against the running game, but we felt like we could run the ball on them. With Lovett and we've added Ellison, we've got 2 big, strong, fast backs that you need to run the ball with. So we just made up our minds that, hey, we've got to start running more with these guys because they can pound the other team. They can break out for long gains also, which we saw in that game. So to me, that's Wade Phillips saying we need to use these running backs. As you noted, this is a spot where you can run on DC. Again, they've given up the most points in the league. So I kind of think I'm leaning into it now. If Anthony McFarland comes back, that's definitely a wrinkle that I don't love, but I think I'm either way. I think that I'm playing Lovett. I'm assuming Lovett is going to be the RB1, but Morgan Ellison did come in and he got 7 rush attempts. He carried for 84 yards last week. So he was elite, 12 yards per carry in his first game action. And of course, Wade Phillips is, you watch his interviews, he's definitely paying attention to like, what are these guys? I mean, I guess that goes without saying that coaches are paying attention to how their players are doing, but you'd hope that he does adjust. Morgan Ellison, a guy who had some success in the XFL, and he's just 5,300. So I think that they're going to pound the rock once again. It sounds like Wade Phillips thinks that he's got, stars in the running game, and he wants to run the ball a little bit more because it sounds like he believes in the running backs. So when I'm not playing Dormady, I am actually going to be leaning pretty heavily into these running backs, and 22% for John Lovett at 7,700. My guess is that I'm still overweight to the field on John Lovett. 13 rush attempts, 4 targets on 17 routes run last week. Just really, really strong numbers. And Morgan Ellison, I mean, especially if Anthony McFarland is out, but even if Anthony McFarland is in, I kind of think Anthony McFarland is, I don't know. We probably can't write off Anthony McFarland completely. I guess my expectation is that Anthony McFarland misses. I might have to reevaluate somewhat if he does come back. But Morgan Ellison at 5,300, 0 ownership, 7 rushes last week. And with the quote from Wade Phillips, that kind of suggests to me that he sees them both as guys that you need to get involved. I'm into that at 5,300.
Yeah, I think the emergence of Ellison just pushes San Antonio more towards being a bit more of a run-heavy team than what we saw in the first few weeks of the season. And, for what it's worth, Ellison was fantastic with the Seattle Sea Dragons last year. He averaged over 5 yards per carry. Philip Lindsay, former NFL running back, was at 2.5 yards per carry. So Ellison is really, really good. He can't really pass block, which is what's kept him off the field. That's, I believe, why he was cut by Arlington, why he at times struggled to see the field with Seattle last year. But yeah, I'm scrolling through DraftKings right now, looking at these running backs that are sub 6,500. I mean, after Matthew Colburn, we've already talked about TJ Pledger, he's a little interesting, but then you're looking at guys like Saquandre White, Davion Smith, Titus Swen, Day Hunter. Morgan Ellison is an ascending player, and especially in these spring leagues, we always want to take shots on ascending players. In the NFL, these coaches can be stubborn. They can say, oh, well, this guy's got the draft capital, this guy's got the contract. None of that really exists in the UFL. They see a guy doing well, they give him the rock. So Morgan Ellison, I didn't think I was going to play him before this show, but I think Neil may have convinced me. I'll take a shot or two on our guy Morgan Ellison on this slate. And the nice thing with Ellison is you can just play all chalk and then play Ellison, and you have a very unique lineup. So yep. I certainly like that as well. And he's a guy you have to play if you wanted to play like an AJ McCarron triple stack. There are builds that, you just can't get to if you don't play a 5K running back this week. So, that's sort of another notch in Ellison's cap. But, to me, if McFarland does suit up, I think I'm just going to completely stay away. I see a very gross 3-way committee, kind of similar to Arlington. It won't be great. All right. So moving on to the DC side of this game, once again, I feel like, it's coming for Jordan Teamu. We just really haven't seen it. At the very least, we do have a very strong value on the DC side when it comes to the passing attack in our guy, Vincent Smith. He's not really popping a ton for us, but he's in a similar range, overall, I think, to a guy like COC Mariner. He's a routes run per yard champion. Vincent Smith is 96% route share last week. He did, of course, 0, but even so, second on the team in target share behind only Kelvin Harmon over his last 2 games. So, Neil, I'm curious on your thoughts on Jordan Teamu and this passing attack broadly, but I imagine Vincent Smith is a guy you'll be targeting. Unfortunately, though, we haven't projected for 20% ownership.
Yeah, that's kind of rough seeing the 20% ownership. My guess is I'm not too far behind 20%. I'm probably going to be right there. 29 routes on. Only saw 2 targets last week and didn't bring any of them in, as you said. Goose egged in that game. So I guess we can hope, based on the goose egg last week, that maybe he comes in a little bit lighter than 20%. But yeah, I think just having that kind of usage at 4,000, 20% ownership seems reasonable enough. I'm debating how much I'm going to be in on Jordan Teamu. It's, again, not going to be back to the way over the field on Teamu here against our Brahmas, but I probably will be. I'll have some. I guess my take is I don't have a strong take. I think I'm probably going to be pretty close to the 11% we have Teamu projected for. I also don't think there's anybody that I really want to play from the pass catchers other than Calvin Harmon and Vincent Smith. So that sort of hurts me a little bit. He also only has 23, 22, 24 pass attempts the past 3 weeks for Jordan Ta'amu. So that, like, there are some, I don't know, reasons to not really want to go in on Jordan Ta'amu. When I really wanted to play him was after he had 45 pass attempts week 1, 32 week 2. Kind of felt like, okay, they're just going to air it out. And it seems like they've gone away from that and decided to run the ball a little bit instead. And I do think the Brahmas have a pretty strong defense. So not my favorite spot for Jordan Ta'amu. And he also 11% ownership. That's a little bit higher than we were seeing at one point in the year. So I guess if I had to guess, my guess is I come in a little bit underweight to Jordan Ta'amu, but I'll have some shares.
Yeah, I definitely want some exposure there. I mean, we know Ta'amu can show a pretty solid ceiling there, and we know the team is comfortable running him. For what it's worth, last week was ideal game script for a lot of pass attempts from Ta'amu, but they benched him right around the 10-minute mark of the fourth quarter for DeAndre Francois. I thought they gave up there just a little bit too early. I mean, I know that I think it was a 27-point deficit. I understand that it's extremely unlikely, but I believe they got the ball back 3 more times since they benched Jordan Ta'amu. You could theoretically at least tie the game up if you kept your starters in. So that was a little disappointing to see, but yeah, Ta'amu's a guy I want to take some shots on. And it's just tough though, when, Kelvin Harmon's going to be around 20%, Vincent Smith's going to be around 20%. And there really isn't anyone else here who's compelling much at all. I mean, Caden Smith, maybe at 2,900, that feels a little too cute. The slot role, despite being, probably the most valuable receiver role in this offense, is just a really gross timeshare between Chris Rowland and Kiki Cutie. We saw Cutie with, I believe, 18 routes last week, Rowland with 12. So, sort of a 66-33 split there. That's not going to get it done. Yeah. And then, the backfield isn't looking significantly better. It was pretty frustrating because I was hoping a bit that the team would lean into Saquandre White as their potential bell cow. We did see White earn 52% of snaps, 40% of routes, but unfortunately, Cameron Harris stole the lone backfield touchdown and did actually beat out Saquandre White in terms of red zone touches, 3-1. Neil, any love for this backfield here? To me, it just feels like there are way better spots on this slate.
Yeah, that was rough. I was really in on Zaquandre White last week. Gets 15 rush attempts, couple targets, and does 0 with them. That was just a brutal outcome for, I think it was the right process, but the results were not there for the Zaquandre White play. I do think like he's still in play at 5,500. I think I prefer Ellison just at lower ownership in a better spot, but I'll still have some Zaquandre White. 17 total opportunities with the 15 rush attempts and 2 targets last week. Like that is still pretty elite for UFL, and he's only 5,500. So even with Cameron Harris there, I think that he should have some opportunities. And I think it was sort of just a coin flip thing where I guess Cameron Harris had 3. If I'm remembering right, he had 3 attempts in a row, like all like from the 3-yard line, gets stuffed at the 1, and then they give it right back to him. So maybe he is just their goal line there. That hurts me if that is the case, but I don't think I'm going to Cameron Harris at 6,900. I do think that I will have some shares of Zaquandre Wright at 5,500. One more note on the passing game is just because you were talking about Kiki Cutie and Chris Rowland. Rowland on 12 routes had 5 targets. So I guess this is exactly what we thought Ty Scott, early in the year was like, oh, he gets so many targets when he's out there. At some point, they're going to let him run a little bit more. But I kind of feel that way about Chris Rowland. Like one of these weeks, it wouldn't be that shocking to see them just be like, oh, he's actually pretty good. Like we like to use him. Maybe we should let him play a little bit more. So I think he's like marginally in play at 4,500.
I guess so. It's just tough when I think they want to give the routes to the guy with the NFL pedigree. Cutie was the starter at the beginning of the year, and still seems to be. Rowland he's playing great. I mean, he was with the Philadelphia Stars in sort of previous USFL seasons, and he looked good, but not like this dominant of a wide receiver. But they really didn't give him. It was more of a gimmicky wide receiver role, if I remember correctly. So seeing him in a true slot role has been pretty impressive, and it'd be great if they gave him the ball more, or if they went away from their base 11 personnel and started running more 10, more 4 wide receiver sets. But I just don't think that's what DC wants to do at all. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to get to any Rowland. I actually played a good amount of Chris Rowland, probably about 10% last week, and was a little disappointed despite the great targets per route run. Just wasn't out there quite enough. Neil, before we get out of here, if you're trailing big headed into these final two games, do you have any like strong late swap options you're looking at? To me, some of the guys who stick out, I sort of just sorted by ownership on these final two games here. Deontay Burnett, I think, is pretty interesting at 6,700. He should be a pretty easy guy to swap to. That's a very reasonable salary. And then Wes Hills is going to be really tough to get to because there just aren't many expensive plays on this slate, and no one's going to want to come off Jontre Kirkland for a guy like Wes Hills, but there might be scenarios where you have to do that. Is there anyone else here who stands out to you as a potential late swap option if you're trailing big headed into Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, if I'm willing to play Morgan Ellison going in, I'm definitely willing to make some swaps to Morgan Ellison in my lineups. I think that he is a great late swap option, even if you're not sold on him originally. He could at least help you come from behind a little bit. I think you nailed it though with Wes Hills. If you have the salary, I think Deontay Burnett, I love that call out. So I think you're kind of all over the right plays there. And maybe that's a spot where if you don't have a ton of salary, or you have a 2v2 where maybe you could play both of Chris Rowland at 4,500 and Wes Hills or something like that. I think kind of in play for Chris Rowland, I would say is a better late swap play than a play going in. Yeah, Zaquandre White at 10% seems fine, but yeah, I think you basically nailed the best plays there.
Yeah, I was a little surprised when White's ownership came in as high as it did. I manually adjusted him down. I might adjust him down slightly more. Even 10% would be a little surprising to me. For whatever reason, I really don't think they want to give him the goal line carries. I just checked. He actually weighs more than Cameron Harris. And generally, especially in these spring leagues, you can just use like how much a player weighs as how likely they are to get goal line touches. But he looks thin. He looks a lot thinner than Cameron Harris does. Cameron Harris, 5'10", 210 pounds. Zaquandre White, 6'1", 215. So I think they just want to give those goal line carries to the dense guy. But I could see, we know this team wants to lean a little more bell cow heavy. So I could see some better than expected usage for a guy like Zaquandre White. So wouldn't quite hate him as a late swap option, but I think we pretty much covered it. And again, guys, I mean, so many of the players who are max entering, as Johnny Proctor said last week, it's just not really worth their time to go through, team by team and handle late swaps. Just too annoying, not worth their time because they're playing other sports. So again, late swap is the biggest single advantage you can have in UFL. It's absolutely massive. If you're trailing, you want to swap to some of these thinner plays with low ownership. And then if you're ahead, you want to swap to the more optimal plays per our projections. Neil, before we get out of here, why don't you tell everybody about your lovely YouTube channel, your great show? You just had a really good interview with a star DFS player who also grinds UFL DFS. So why don't you mention all that?
Yeah, some of you may know BP Colonna from the Fantasy Points Discord because he's grinding UFL with us. He was my guest on Playing for Keeps this week on Wednesday night. Really, really interesting to hear from him. 21 years old and kicking all of our asses at DFS. That was a really fun interview. I don't know if I had announced this prior to our show last week that I am, my plan is to stream all 150 of my Best Ball Mania drafts this year. I am through 8 of them so far. So I've got 142 more Best Ball Mania drafts to get through over the course of the summer. If you are interested in best ball, would love if you check out my channel, come join me. And of course you can find all that stuff on my Twitter at PlayerQDFS. I think my YouTube, if you just search my name, Neil Orfield, you'll find my YouTube. I will be grinding best ball all summer, so hopefully you come hang out with me.
Yeah, Neil, what's your plan for that? Are you going to have, guests on for shows? Or are you just going to do marathon streams where you try to knock out 10 drafts at once? It's, I saw your tweet. Yes. It looks like you're going to be the oldest man ever to stream all 150 best ball drafts. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, that is the claim. I don't think I've seen anybody who can refute it. I don't know that anybody wants to who's older than me. So yes, I believe I will be the oldest person ever to stream all 150. I had a Brick 75 on already this week. I'll definitely be having guests pretty frequently. Jake, hey, you want to come on sometime?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to, man. You gotta give me
sometime.
Yeah, you got to give me like at least a month and a half because I don't think my NFL takes have been very sharpened at this point. But after, once the UFL regular season ends, then I'll start grinding on these best ball drafts, and I'll get in the Best Ball Mania 5 streets with you. Which, by the way, really great payout structure this year, I think, relative to last year. So all of our EVs should be a little bit higher, assuming we can maintain decent advance rates and all that. But that does it for the Week 6 edition of the UFL breakdown. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in, and I will see you all at the top of the leaderboard. What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.